All right, let's get into it. Today, we're tackling one of the greatest puzzles in all of literature, Vladimir Nabokov's incredible 1962 novel, Pale Fire. And trust me, this is a book that doesn't just ask you to read it, it dares you to solve it. So when it first came out, the famous critic Mary McCarthy called it a work of perfect beauty, symmetry, strangeness. She even said it was one of the century's truly great works of art. That's about as high as praise gets, right? Well, not so fast. Because other critics, they absolutely hated it. They called it a total wreck, unreadable, just a complete exercise in bewilderment. So, what is going on here? Is it a masterpiece? Or is it a mess? That's the mystery we're going to try and unpack. To even begin to understand the controversy, you have to get your head around the book's seriously bizarre structure. I mean, this is not your typical novel. It's something else entirely. So at the very heart of the novel, you have a poem, and it is exactly 999 lines long. Now, this poem, titled Pale Fire, is actually beautiful. It's a moving autobiographical work by a fictional poet named John Shade. He writes about his life, his marriage, the tragic death of his daughter. If the book were just this poem, it would be pretty straightforward. But that poem is only about 30 pages. The rest of the book, we're talking hundreds of pages, is where things get really, really weird. You see, right after Shade finishes the poem, he's tragically murdered. And his neighbor, this strange, incredibly arrogant academic named Charles Kinbote, literally swoops in and steals the manuscript. He decides he's the editor now, and he adds a foreword, a massive line-by-line commentary, and an index that completely swallow the original poem. And this quote right here, it tells you everything you need to know about Kinbote. He flat out admits that Shade wouldn't agree with his take, but hey, for better or worse, he's the commentator, and he gets the last word. He just completely hijacks the whole thing. So what is this grand interpretation that Kinbote is forcing on us? Well, he insists Shade's poem isn't about some boring American life at all. Oh no. He says it's secretly a coded epic full of political intrigue and high adventure. In his commentary, Kinbote spins this incredible story. He talks about a faraway kingdom called Zembla, its beloved exiled king, a man named Charles the Beloved, his daring escape from revolutionaries, and this bumbling but relentless assassin named Gratis who is hunting the king across the world. I mean, it is a full-blown spy thriller, and according to our guide, Charles Kinbote, this entire story is secretly hidden in the nooks and crannies of John Shade's quiet, domestic poem. Okay, but this is where the real puzzle of Pale Fire begins, because as you start to read Kinbote's obsessive notes, you begin to notice some major discrepancies. You just can't help but ask yourself, wait a minute. Shade is writing about his daughter and his quiet life in suburban America? What in the world could that possibly have to do with an exiled king from a fantasy land called Zembla? The connection feels flimsy, to say the least. And when you look closer, the disconnect is just staggering. For instance, when Shade describes a snowy landscape as a crystal land, Kinbote is sure it's a secret reference to Zembla. When Shade uses this gorgeous metaphor, I was the shadow of the waxwing slain, Kinbote somehow twists it into a direct reference to the assassin, Gratis. The connections he makes are just absurdly forced. This, my friends, is a classic literary device. Kinbote is what we call an unreliable narrator. His entire version of the story is completely warped by his own ego, his paranoia, and what seems to be some pretty serious delusions. And what that means is we, the readers, simply cannot trust our guide. The story of Zembla isn't the real story. The real story is a tragedy that's buried deep beneath all of Kinbote's lies. And to figure it out, we have to become detectives. So let's put on our detective hats. The most widely accepted solution to this whole puzzle is known as the Botkin Theory, and it's a theory that Nabokov himself actually pointed to. We can piece it all together using clues that Kinbote accidentally leaves for us in his own commentary and index. Cracking this case really comes down to 3 key pieces of evidence. So let's look at the clues one by one. So let's break it down. First, the anagram. There are all these little hints that Kinbote is actually an anagram for Botkin, a Russian professor who is slowly losing his mind.
Second, the real target. It turns out the assassin isn't some Zemblan agent at all. He's an escaped lunatic hunting for Judge Goldsworth, the guy who owns the house Kinbote is renting. And third, the final piece, mistaken identity. Multiple people in the book mention that the poet, John Shade, looks exactly like Judge Goldsworth. And boom, suddenly, all the pieces just click into place. The entire Zemblan fantasy, the king, the escape, the secret messages, it's all a total fabrication. It's a delusion created in the lonely, insane mind of Professor Botkin. John Shade's murder wasn't a political assassination. It was just a horrible, senseless accident. The killer was aiming for the judge and shot the wrong man.
But the absolute genius of Pale Fire goes way beyond just solving this mystery. The very structure of the book, the thing that seemed so confusing at first, was actually decades ahead of its time.
This way of reading was revolutionary. Pale Fire forces you to jump around, from a line in the poem, to a note in the commentary, to an entry in the index, and then back again. It's interactive. And you can draw a direct line from this to the choose-your-own-adventure books, which led to hypertext fiction on the early internet, and eventually to modern video games where we are active participants shaping the story.
Just think about that for a second. Nabokov, writing this back in 1962, basically created a book that works like a website, with all these internal links and nonlinear paths. He pretty much predicted how we would interact with stories in the digital age. It's kind of mind-blowing. And this all brings us to the final brilliant question the book leaves us with. Because while the Botkin theory is the most accepted solution, it's not the only one. Nabokov leaves just enough room for doubt. So, is the real joy in finding the quote-unquote correct answer? Or is the joy in the act of interpretation itself? That frustrating, thrilling, maddening process of playing detective? That right there is the magic of Pale Fire.